Welcome to chapter 47 of the book of Genesis. Jacob settles in Goshen. So now we have Jacob and the people that came with him from Canaan into Egypt because of the famine and because Jacob's son Joseph is now second in command in Egypt. And Pharaoh has invited Jacob and his family to come and settle in the choice area. And it begins in chapter 47. I'll read a little in the Greek and we'll go through the chapter. Elthon the Iosif, apingele to Pharao legon. Patir mu ke I adalfi mu, ke takatini ke I voesafton, ke pantata afton, Ilthan ek giz Canaan, ke idu, isin en tigi gesem. And Joseph came to report to Pharaoh, saying, My father and my brothers, and the cattle and their oxen and all their things are come from out of the land of Canaan. And Canaan was about 150 miles east of Egypt there. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen, which we're not really sure, but someplace in between the Nile River and the border of where Israel is today. Probably closer to the Nile because of the fertility of the river. And from his brothers, as Joseph's brothers, he took 5 men and stood them before Pharaoh. Can you imagine these men were previously over in the land of Canaan, just shepherds or grazers of the flocks and the herds. And all of a sudden now they're standing in front of one of the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said this is when they were building the pyramids, and Pharaoh said to the brothers of Joseph, What is your work? And they said to Pharaoh, Well, your servants are shepherds of flocks, even we and our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, We come to sojourn in the land, for there is not a pasture for the cattle of your servants, for the famine grew in strength in the land of Canaan. Now then, your servants shall dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, saying, Your father and your brothers have come to you. Behold, the land of Egypt is before you. Settle in the best land. Wow. Here they're in famine, and now they are settling in the best land of Egypt. Your fathers and your brothers. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you should have knowledge that there are among them able men, you place them in charge of my cattle. Wow. And Joseph brought Jacob, his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, his old man. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, How many are the years of days of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my life, which I sojourned, are 130 years. Small and severe have become the days of the years of my life. They did not attain to the days of the years of the life of my fathers, which days they sojourned. Now his fathers that he's probably talking about would be Abraham, who lived to 175. Now, Jacob lives for another 15 years after this. And then Isaac lived 180 years. And then here Jacob, he lives 147 years. In verse 10, And Jacob, having blessed Pharaoh, went forth from him. And Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and gave to them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh assigned. And Joseph measured out grain to his father and to his brothers, and to all the house of his father, grain according to person. So now they are back in having food for their animals in themselves. And it continues, now the famine prevails, and there was not grain in all the earth, for the famine grew in strength exceedingly, and the land of Egypt failed, and the land of Canaan because of the famine. And Joseph brought together all the silver being found in the land of Egypt. Now here, I see the beginning of the hatred of these people, because Joseph has all this grains that he got from the people. Now he's selling it back to the people for more money, and they probably know that and have a resentment. So this can be the beginning of the downfall or the beginning of the hate of the Jews, that we find out that they were enslaved. It could have been right away. I put together this a graph of the 400 years. It says there's two numbers for the years that they were in Egypt. The first is 400 and the second is 430. And in Genesis 15:13, under the 400, and it was said to Abram, in knowing you will know that your seed will be a sojourner in a land not their own, and they will enslave them and will afflict them and humble them 400 years. So one, it would be after the death of Joseph that they were humbled and afflicted, because this Pharaoh was very generous to the Jacob and his family. And then the affliction mentions it in Exodus 1:11, before they start going out to through the wilderness. Now the 430 years is mentioned in Exodus 12:40. It says, and the dwelling of the sons of Israel, which they dwelt in the land of Egypt, and in the land of Canaan, they and their fathers, 430 years. And it came to pass after the 430 years, came forth all the force of the Lord from out of the land of Egypt. Now 430 years is different than the 400 years that was told to Abraham. Abram's time was humbled and afflicted, but it doesn't say that any place here in the 400 years. Then, back to the 400 years, we see in Acts 7:6, Stephen says, and thus God spoke that his seed will be a sojourner in an alien land, and they will enslave it and afflict them 400 years. So here we have the 400 years of this time of an affliction. And then in the 430, in Galatians 3:17, Paul says, and this I say, that the covenant being validated by God in Christ, that is the law taking place after 430 years, voids not so as to render the promise useless. So the promise, even though the law was there, the promise was even longer. Now we have the 400 and the 430. Now, the 400 was in Genesis 15:13 and Acts 7:6, where it says that they would be enslaved, afflicted, and humbled. Then the 30 years more is in Exodus 12:40 and Galatians 3:17, and that was the total time in Egypt. And in the land of Canaan, it mentioned in the first one, I think Exodus 12:40. Now, where's the 30 years? Well, I believe it's right here. It says Joseph was 17 years old in the land of Canaan when he sold him into slavery, basically Genesis 37:2, and he went into Egypt. And then 13 years of slavery was Genesis 41:46. It mentions that, so now we have 30 years. So there are the 430 years. If you're interested in that amount of the time, a lot of people are. Now going back to our text, and in the land of Canaan, from the grain which they brought, and he measured out grain to them, and Joseph carried in all the silver into the house of Pharaoh. So now Joseph has sold this a grain and have all the money from all the people. And all the silver dissipated from out of the land of Egypt and from out of the land of Canaan. And all the Egyptians came to Joseph saying, give to us breads. The Egyptians came, and now the Egyptians know that these Jews came, Ivraeon, and Joseph was an Ivraeon, not an Egyptian, and he controlled everything because of this Pharaoh. A young Pharaoh, because it says that Joseph was like a father to him, and Joseph wasn't that old. And then they said, why should we die before you? For our silver has dissipated. And Joseph said to them, bring your cattle, and I will give to you breads in exchange for your cattle, if the silver has dissipated. Well, now, rather than just giving it to them and making amends with the people and being friends, give it to them as they needed it without taking their money, probably is the best thing to do. Now, all these stories in the Bible, what people do, just because they do them, and it's in the Bible, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. There's a lot of stories that people did the wrong things. And I believe right here is the beginning of the bad. Joseph is, instead of, now a lot of people would think, well, Joseph is just this perfect person. Well, I don't believe he was. He was allowed to interpret dreams, but God changed everything. But here, he was not a giving person to the people in need, as Jesus would have us to do, rather than if someone wants something, then you give it to them, not charge them or so forth. But yet Joseph, for some reason, is deciding to do all this and sell everything and give it to Pharaoh. Now the cattle. And they led their cattle to Joseph. Now they might start of being grumbling. Now we give them the silver, now we the cattle. And Joseph gave to them breads in return for the horses, and for the sheep, and for the oxen, and for the donkeys. And he nourished them with breads in exchange for all of their cattle in that year, maybe in the second year. And that year went by, and they came to him in the second year, so that may have been the first year, and said to him, lest at some time we should be obliterated from our master, you, if we died, for since the silver has dissipated, and the possessions and the cattle to you, the master, and there has not been left behind to us before our master, but only our own body and our own land, that then we should not die before you, and the land should be made desolate. You acquire us and our land for breads, and we will be to you and our land servants. Are actually going to be more of slaves. Well, servants to Pharaoh, it says, so I'm not going to go push it into slavery. But so give us seed that we should sow, and we should live and should not die, and the land shall not be made desolate. Okay, now they have went into somewhat of a servitude and given up their land, and were all for Pharaoh. And Joseph acquired all the land of the Egyptians to Pharaoh, for the Egyptians gave their land to Pharaoh, for the famine prevailed over them, and the land came to Pharaoh. So now it says, and the people were reduced to slavery. So now it does say slavery to him as servants from the uttermost parts of the boundaries of Egypt unto the uttermost parts, except the land of the priests only. This Joseph did not acquire, for Pharaoh gave a portion as a gift to the priests, and they ate the portion which Pharaoh gave to them. On account of this, they did not give up their land. And Joseph said to all the Egyptians, Behold, I have acquired you and your land today to Pharaoh. Take to yourselves seed and sow the land, and there will be produce of it, and you will give the fifth part to Pharaoh, and the 4 parts will be to you yourselves, for seed in the earth and for food to you and to all the ones in your houses. So now they have become slaves, but now he's giving it to them, also that they would not only become slaves, but whatever they grew, 20% would go to the Pharaoh. Well, I could see where these people could really start forming an attitude against a Jew because him and his family, they probably saw what was going on and didn't like it because they're losing everything to this man. That's just my take on it. I could be wrong, of course. And they said, well, you have delivered us. We found favor before our master, and we will be servants to Pharaoh. And Joseph established it to them as an order until this day for the land of Egypt to take a fifth for Pharaoh, except of the land of the priests only, which was not to Pharaoh. And if Moses was writing this, he's talking about it, even at that time of Moses, there were 20% of everything went to Pharaoh. And Israel, as could be the person or the people, dwelt in the land of Egypt upon the land of Goshen, and they were heir over it. And they grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob outlived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. And the days of Jacob's years of his life were 147 years. And the days approached for Israel as Jacob to die, and he called his son Joseph and said to him, well, if I have found favor before you, place your hand upon my thigh, and you will do for me a charity and truth. It's sort of like putting your hand on the Bible, promising you're going to do it, swearing. That is to not entomb me into Egypt. So do this thing for me. Don't bury me here. But I shall be gone to sleep with my fathers. Then you shall lift me from out of Egypt and entomb me in their burying place. And Joseph said, I will do according to your saying. And Jacob, he said to him, swear by an oath to me. And Joseph swore by an oath to him, Jacob. And Israel, or Jacob, did obeisance upon the top of his cane, which is quoted in Hebrews 11:21. It says, by belief, and this was the hall of fame of the people that believed, the believers. By belief, Jacob, dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and did obeisance upon the top of his cane. Now, whether this ties into the dream that Joseph had at the beginning when he says, he saw the dream, and Jacob says, me and your mother are going to bow down with your brothers. We haven't seen Jacob do an obeisance yet when he's returned, but here it does mention that on the top of his cane, so it could be in answer to that dream. Chapter 48, our next video seminar. Now, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, and the other ones will go through this in chapter 48, our next video seminar. Hope you'll join us. Till then, God bless.